the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we conduct this discussion for the hour about this massive WikiLeaks release of close to 400,000 documents, the largest leak of Pentagon intelligence documents in the history of this country. We're talking to David Leigh. He is investigations editor at the Guardian of London. We're also joined by Nir Rosen, who's just returned from Iraq, an independent journalist, and Pratap Chatterjee, who has evaluated sections of the documents for the Guardian of London. But David Leigh, I want to go back to you. The Guardian website is interesting in that you have an interactive map that shows every civilian death. Can you explain what you've done?
Well, we've tried to bring alive, if that's not an inappropriate word, the thousands and thousands of violent deaths that have occurred in Iraq since the invasion took place. And you can see that there's more than 100,000, and you know, the majority of these are civilians. They're caused by a variety of things. You know, they're caused by IED explosions, they're caused by sectarian murders, and they're caused by military action in which the US and its allies are shooting people, sometimes at checkpoints, for example. So you can press a button and you can you can see this bloodbath unfold before you, and it's rather a horrifying sight.
Can you talk about the Wolf Brigade, the Iraq Interior Ministry Special Commandos, David Leigh?
One of the things that's come out of these reports that I think ought to be followed through is torture, and who's responsible for torture. There's some very sinister entries about the Wolf Brigade. This was a special commando unit under the charge of the Ministry of the Interior in Iraq. It went out and it pulled in people, mainly Sunni insurgents, and it appears to have tortured and executed them on a pretty routine basis, sometimes with horrific tortures involving hanging up people like slaughtered deer or drilling into their kneecaps with electric drills. I mean, it's that level of horror. What is alarming is that US advisors were sitting in a room with these people. There are well-documented accounts of a US military advisor, Colonel James Steele, being with the Wolf Brigade in the town of Samarra when they brought in prisoners. A New York Times journalist could hear them screaming in pain and terror outside while he was in a room with Steele. Now, the question that arises, and that ought to be followed through, I think, by inquiries in America, is who was giving the orders? Steele is a man who was answerable, again, to people further up. He was answerable to General Petraeus. He was probably answerable to Donald Rumsfeld at that time. These are the questions that arise from the logs, and the questions about the Wolf Brigade aren't questions about barbarism in Iraq. They're questions about barbarism in the United States.
I want to go to Pentagon spokesperson Jeff Morrell, who denied that U.S. forces had ignored the torture of Iraqis. He also addressed the war log's disclosure of thousands of additional Iraqi civilian casualties.
Well, let me just say, with regards to the allegations of not intervening when coming across detainee abuse, not true. I mean, our practice, our procedures, our policy has always been that when we witness abuse of that nature, we intervene. When we come across evidence of it after the fact, we report it up the chain of command and then take action with the Iraqis. And if they're not responsive, there are consequences for how we work with their military in the future. With regards to civilian casualties, we did everything in our power and continue to do everything in our power to minimize, if not avoid them altogether. It runs counter to the whole philosophy of a counterinsurgency to not do that. We are trying to win the trust and the confidence of the Iraqi people, trying to prevent them from joining the al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups in that country. Work with us, work with the government.
I'm going to get a quick comment from David Leigh, then move on to Nir Rosen, who has been on the ground in Iraq for quite a long time, especially looking at this kind of violence. David Leigh, your response to the Pentagon spokesperson, Jeff Morrell.
Well, it avoids the whole question because, sure, they were required to report up, but they were not required to investigate. And I think the evidence shows there were occasions when American troops did intervene. Most occasions, they stood by.
Nir Rosen, you've just come back from Iraq. Talk about Jeff Morell's response and this issue of the U.S. Being there and intervening or not?
Well, in my book, I managed to document quite a few cases of Americans who worked with Iraqi police and Iraqi army being aware of torture, of execution. It wasn't just the Wolf Brigade. You had a variety of special commando brigades that were formed in 2005, 2006. Collaboration between even the Iraqi army in 2006 and Shia militias to cleanse neighborhoods like Huria of thousands of Sunni civilians. I also managed to speak with quite a few American officers who were outraged by it and tried to do something, and often they were told that these units are cooperating with us, leave them alone. There's a captain called Phil Carter that I spoke to in Diyala who had an Iraqi commander called Cable Ali, who was torturing prisoners, and they had secret detention cells for Sunnis. This is routine. Of course, not only did the Iraqis learn from Saddam, I mean, they have this legacy of torture, but they also learned from the Americans who created these security forces. After all, we were torturing people in Iraq. We were detaining without trial. We were killing and not investigating. So they had a perfectly good role model in the first few years in observing how the U.S. forces acted. And many of these offenses continue to this day. When I was there a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to many Iraqi army and police officers who told me about arbitrary detentions, tens of thousands of people being held without trial in terrible conditions. And when you're in the initial phase, when you're arrested and interrogated, you're tortured. You can be sodomized with glass bottles. You can be tortured with electricity. You're going to be beaten. Extortion is also routine. People are arrested just so that they can pay money to be released. So this is sort of a systemic thing now.
Did the documents expand on cases you'd already known about? Was it interesting to see them from that point of view?
It is. One thing we have to remember, though, these documents, there's been some people have treated them with too much, I think, sensationalism, in that what the documents reflect is the American military's view of what was happening. So when they record an incident that actually happened,
written by the American military,
yeah.
Right?
So if they record a death, if they record a torture incident, then that's a factual incident that occurred. We know it's true historically. But a lot of the other allegations about Iranian involvement, various plots, people have been giving them too much credence. The New York Times, for example, has been really celebrating the alleged role of Iran simply because American guys on the ground were reporting the role of Iran. But this is the same American intelligence that thought that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and thought that Saddam had a connection to September 11. So we need to be very skeptical about some of the allegations. And the ones that deal with civilian casualties, with torture, with the nature of how security forces operated, I think are very important historically, and hopefully there'll be a reminder the next time we invade a country that this is a terrible cost.
Of course, we are still in Afghanistan, so it might tell us also a lot about Afghanistan.
I think that's true.
The war logs also show